Cheng, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up in the next hour, the other tweet heard round the world, why Tesla CEO Elon Musk is in hot water once again with the SEC. Plus, 5G was the hot topic at this year's MWC, but the uncertain future of Huawei continues to overshadow the industry. We bring you the latest out of Barcelona. And privacy practice. California isn't waiting on the federal government to regulate big tech, why its proposal has companies like Facebook fighting back. Tesla mystery solved. Elon Musk is launching a new Model 3 at a lower base price of $35,000. The news first broke in the electric car blog Electrek. This after Tesla CEO Elon Musk teased some mysterious Tesla news earlier this week, tweeting Thursday, 2 p.m., California. Some Tesla news. To discuss, we've got Loop Ventures managing partner Gene Munster on the phone in Minneapolis and in Detroit, Bloomberg automotive reporter Keith Naughton. So, Keith, what do we know so far?
Well, going with a lower price Model 3 with a shorter range gives Elon the opportunity to meet these very ambitious sales volume targets he has. You know, they're planning to produce 400,000 Model 3s this year. That's a lot of Model 3s, and you can't sell them all at over $50,000. So having a lower priced Model 3 should bring in new customers, bring in value customers. The average price of a car in the United States these days is $37,000. So this makes it a Joe average kind of Tesla for the first time.
Gene, hasn't Tesla promised that the price would eventually come down to $35,000? It just took some time to get there?
Yeah, this was the original promise back 2 years ago, Emily. And so in some respects, this isn't news, but in other respects, it's probably the biggest news since the Model 3 itself was announced, because the simple math was that many people felt that this car, to get to $35,000 and to produce it profitably, was impossible. And so I think that is what is so important here. The $35,000, it doesn't sound like it's that significant, but compare that to the rest of the car industry, which the few that do have EVs are typically at 70,000 plus right now. And you can start to quickly see why Tesla's 80% market share that they had in the U.S. last year on electric vehicles, they can maintain that kind of share, at least in the near term, the next 1 or 2 years.
Right. Tesla, as you mentioned, already way ahead in the electric car market. It's going to be hard for other automakers to catch up. Again, Tesla shares halted as we wait for Tesla to officially announce what we believe will be a lower cost, $35,000 base price for the Model 3. Keith, why did it take these 2 years to get here?
You know, it's typical of automakers, and I know Tesla is not a typical automaker, but usually you start with the higher price models because that gives you the biggest profits. It gives you the payback. And then you move down the price ladder and start putting out the lower price models and go for the volume. So you need to get a critical mass going with those high price ones. He's achieved that, but now he has these very ambitious production targets. And in order to sell all those cars he plans to produce, he really needs to have a lower price model.
Now, Gene, how many more cars do you think Tesla will be able to sell at this price? How does this change your model?
Well, it will. Right now, we were a little bit conservative relative to their 400,000 expectations. We're at 300, so we probably need to go and rethink what our estimate will be for this year and for next year. But the simple takeaway is this, is if you look at the broader market, there's 80 million vehicles sold a year. Last year globally is 1% of those were electric. In the future, there's no question that 100% of vehicles, now that might be 2 years from 10 years from now or 30 years from now, but that's ultimately where we're going. And so I think how many can they sell? What does it mean for the model? Is this can be a significantly bigger company because of the $35,000 price.
Meantime, Keith, earlier this week, we covered the news that the SEC has asked a judge to hold Musk in contempt for his tweets around those production numbers which Gene was mentioning. Is it 500,000 or 400,000? And did he tweet too soon? Do you think some of these legal issues could impede Tesla's progress this year?
Well, they could impede Elon's progress, that's for sure. He once again, as we know, put out a tweet that said they were at a 500,000 rate on the Model 3 when, in fact, they're going to produce 400,000 this year, and he had to correct that. So he continues to tweet unfettered, and that's the issue the SEC has.
Gene, you had some choice words about Musk's latest tweets. You said that he has been reckless. How concerned are you that these issues will continue to affect his leadership and possibly then the company?
Concerned, and I want to make it clear that I'm a believer in the Tesla story and believe in Elon Musk and think that he is still better that he is part of the company. But nonetheless, I was at one point 6-9 months ago hopeful that he could change. And unfortunately, he's not going to change. He's going to continue to do some reckless things on the edges. And I just hope that this recklessness doesn't actually impact the business, because the company does have a wonderful mission. And I think they're in a great place to change the world.
The former CEO of Pepsi is now the newest member of Amazon's board. Indra Nooyi will also serve on the board's audit committee. This, according to a regulatory filing. Nooyi becomes the 5th woman on the e-commerce giant's 11-person board. Last year, Amazon pledged to increase the diversity of its board following a shareholder complaint. Nooyi served as CEO of Pepsi from 2006 to 2018. Still ahead, President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, accuses him of criminal conduct in office in a hotly contested House hearing. What we learned about those 2016 hacked Democratic National Committee emails. Plus, Huawei fights back, taking center stage at MWC in Barcelona. Huawei poking fun at U.S. intelligence. We discuss next. This is Bloomberg.
In San Francisco, a lot of tech action today.
Our top stories this morning in D.C. and
the Dow and the S&P.
Shall we? So the euro on a 7-day
sizable moves in the currency market. Averages down 0.5%.
We begin in the oil patch. Saudi Arabia.
Brent crude pretty much unchanged.
Welcome to Bloomberg, the first word Asia.
The U.S. and Japan duke it out over exchange.
China's slumping onshore bond market is great.
AT&T has beat back another attempt by the Trump administration to undo its $85 billion purchase of Time Warner. A U.S. federal appeals court ruled this week that the Justice Department failed to show a lower court made a mistake when it rejected the government's antitrust arguments. The government's next merger decision is the T-Mobile Sprint deal. Staying in Washington on Wednesday, all eyes were on President Trump's longtime former personal attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen, testifying before Congress. The contentious affair, continuing for more than 6 hours, had plenty of heated exchanges as Cohen laid out a list of damning allegations against the president, including a bombshell about the 2016 hacked Democratic National Committee emails.
A lot of people have asked me about whether Mr. Trump knew about the release of the hacked documents, the Democratic National Committee emails, ahead of time. And the answer is yes.
Winnie O'Kelly is Bloomberg executive editor who covers financial investigations. We spoke with her on Wednesday.
According to Cohen, Roger Stone called the office, and Trump's assistant put him on the speakerphone. Roger Stone then said that he had talked to Julian Assange of WikiLeaks and that this dump was coming. I will have to note here that Julian Assange has said he never talked to Roger Stone. So once again, we're kind of caught up in a bit of a what could be the truth here. I will point out that it is often the truth that there is a go-between. So whether someone else who represents Assange might have spoken to Stone remains a question, and whether Stone was even telling the truth, if indeed that's what he said. Roger Stone himself is operating under a gag order by a judge right now, so we're not hearing from him this afternoon. But it is one of several tantalizing things coming out of the Cohen testimony.
So let's talk about the other tantalizing things. I mean, much of what we heard reiterated what he wrote in his opening testimony, but what are the new and most significant revelations otherwise?
Well, I have to be honest about this. I think for prosecutors, there's nothing revelatory here. But for the rest of the public, it is really astounding to see a sitting president attacked and treated like this in Congress. It is quite unusual. Certainly not since Bill Clinton's impeachment hearings have we seen anything quite like this. So the mere attacks on his personality and his character are stunning. In terms of the legal issues, obviously, Michael Cohen cannot speak for prosecutors, but what he can do is give us a glimpse of some of the threads of open inquiries so we can see potential here. And that's all it is at the moment, but quite interesting. And there are several. One involves the Trump Organization itself. According to Cohen, Weisselberg and others there were involved in several questionable activities along with Trump. You know, Cohen says that Trump was the one who dictated the terms of the payments to Stormy Daniels and then repaying Michael Cohen for it. That is according to Cohen. And then Cohen says Weisselberg, who was the longtime chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, took him aside and said, we're going to do this over a period of time, and we're going to make it look like a retainer agreement for legal work. That would be, you know, some kind of a books and records issue for this corporation. So that's one thing. Separately, Cohen talked about how Trump may have inflated values for certain purposes of assets and then undercounted them for other purposes. So did he misrepresent the value of assets, for example, when trying to obtain bank loans, or, for example, when trying to get insurance premiums lowered? Those things have now been brought forth and give us a tantalizing tidbit of what prosecutors could be looking at. Those are a couple good examples.
Now, the president is busy in Hanoi, so unclear how much of this testimony he was able to watch. He did retweet an old tweet that he himself wrote saying, Michael Cohen was one of many lawyers who represented me. Unfortunately, he had other clients, too. He was just disbarred by the state Supreme Court for lying and fraud. He did bad things unrelated to Trump. He is lying in order to reduce his prison time. And, you know, Cohen was interrogated over and over again by Republicans, pointing out that, yes, he did indeed lie to Congress. Yes, he is going to jail for lying to Congress. But that said, what are the tangible sort of legal issues that might arise out of this testimony as it pertains to possible collusion and possible obstruction of justice?
Well, on the collusion front, there wasn't much new. Michael Cohen was asked point blank about that, and he said he was not aware of any efforts. He did suggest that Trump knew about this information that was coming from WikiLeaks. It didn't go to the point of saying that he directed it or was involved in it. The other example was the infamous Trump Tower meeting involving his son, Don Jr., and a Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, and others. In that case, again, Cohen is speaking from what he suspects to be true, but not what he knows. And he talked about how Don Jr. didn't do anything without his father's permission, and that Don Jr. certainly would have consulted him on this. He went so far as to say he recollected a conversation between them that he now believes was about that. But that was not proof. So I think to the core issue about collusion, I don't think we got a lot new today, except for perhaps a little bit more detail, a little bit more color, and a few more questions about whether someone was involved in communicating with WikiLeaks.
That was our Bloomberg executive editor, Winnie O'Kelly. Meantime, one of the side effects of the U.S.'s attempts to ban Huawei's 5G technology is that it's driving interest towards other telecoms. At least that's what Nokia CEO Rajeev Suri told Bloomberg Television at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona this week. Take a listen.
We're watching the situation closely. We're observing. Of course, this is for governments to decide. We will be there for our customers when they need us. We are getting more interest. There are concerns. There are also, some uncertainties, and we just watch the situation closely.
This is Huawei unveiled a brand new and very expensive new phone at MWC. Bloomberg's Heidi Stroud-Watts and I caught up with Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman in L.A. Tuesday.
Huawei has two main parts to its phone business. One is they provide 5G equipment for infrastructures and carriers, around the world, or they intend to. The other thing is they make these phones. They introduced the Mate X, this $2,600 foldable phone. And overall, Huawei makes some cool phones. They are very well received where they are on sale. their 5G technology is also fairly advanced. So that gives all the carriers a real conundrum. One, what if their consumers want to buy Huawei phones that governments and others are not allowing them to sell? That is the carriers. Also 5G, what happens when customers are really asking for 5G? The carriers that offer that 5G functionality are going to have a competitive advantage. So it feels like in terms of both innovation in the technology and the hardware space, as well as the advancements in the 5G and carrier networking space, Huawei really has the carriers in not so great a position.
So, Mark, all of this negativity around Huawei and the networking equipment the U.S. bans in other countries, is that impacting the handset business at all?
You know, right now, it does not appear to be. You see Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint all discussing their 5G rollout plans. Verizon said they're going to be in 30 cities for real 5G by the end of 2019. T-Mobile has indicated they're going to be in a handful of cities by 2019. You're going to see Sprint and AT&T and others really show more progress in their 5G networking across 2020 and then after that. So in the US at least, it does not appear that Huawei is having an impact on 5G networking. But that's a different story outside of the US, where some of the international carriers are concerned about their 5G prospects because of the inability to carry 5G equipment from Huawei.
Mark, I remember the days when, we'd recoil at the idea of $1,000 for a new iPhone model, a $2,600 foldable phone from Huawei. Who's going to be paying for this?
So what we've seen since 2017 when Apple announced the $1,000 phone, the iPhone 10, like you said, we've seen prices skyrocket even more. A couple weeks ago, Samsung announced their Galaxy Fold for about $2,000. It's actually $1,980. Of course, they would price it $20 under that $2,000 threshold, and now about $2,600 in the U.S. equivalent for this folding phone. Who's going to buy it? I don't think many people. I think that price is very much out of reach, but that's early adopter pricing. This is what it costs to make. This is what they're going to have to sell it for. This is why they think it needs to be so expensive, because of its cool functionality. But overall, I don't think you're going to find many people paying for it. Even a diehard tech fan like me, I don't think that's something that I would shell out that kind of money for.
Mark, what did we learn when it comes to the big new thing for wearables at MWC this year?
You know, wearable technology has been slow at MWC this year. The bigger wearable news that we did get was from Samsung a week ago alongside the Galaxy Fold. They announced their new devices, but we are seeing a lot of the smartwatch makers, whether that's Fitbit or Garmin, reporting an uptick in their smartwatch, people enjoying their smartwatches and buying up their smartwatches. Of course, Apple released their latest smartwatch in September, the Apple Watch Series 4.
Meantime, Mark, you've got a news story out reporting that Apple is testing a sleep tracking feature for the Apple Watch. How will this work? What do you know about it?
Right. So before Apple launches a new health or fitness-related feature on the Apple Watch or any of their other devices, they put it through its paces both on outside people that they bring into these labs they have outside their Cupertino campus. They have multiple fitness labs, one for swimming. They have these special chambers that can simulate very hot weather conditions, upwards of 100 degrees, weather conditions that are very cold, bicycles, all sorts of oxygen equipment. So now they're doing the same for sleep tracking for a future version of the Apple Watch destined to launch either next year or this year.
That was Bloomberg's Mark Gurman. Staying with 5G, still ahead, Qualcomm out with a new chip. Why the company's president says 5G is going to become critical infrastructure. Plus, later this hour, our exclusive conversation with Alibaba Executive Vice Chair and co-founder Joe Tsai. Why he is optimistic about a U.S.-China trade deal and why he thinks investing in professional sports could help ease some of the tension. This is Bloomberg. Qualcomm's new chip will connect to fifth-generation high-speed data services that will bring faster downloads and speedier connections. I sat down with Qualcomm President Cristiano Amon for an exclusive interview ahead of MWC about the company's latest moves. Take a listen.
One of the big announcements we made at the show. We're very proud of it. It's the Qualcomm 5G Power Save technology. And that is actually a technology that is allowing the first generation 5G phones to allow you to have an all-day battery life. We have a very mature smartphone base today. Users won't settle for any less than what you have on your phones today, and I think that's the bar for those new 5G flagships, and we're happy of a number of OEMs announced phones at this show with this technology.
Now, isn't it really the carriers that decide how and when 5G happens, and are they really on board for a rapid launch?
Yeah, Emily, this is a great question. I'll do a comparison because I think sometimes we forget about what happened in 4G. When we were about this time launching 4G technology, that was about over a decade ago, we had 2 operators and 4 devices. Look at where we are right now. We have 20 operators, 30 devices. It's an order of magnitude different. Actually, it's a proxy about how much faster 5G is going to get deployed.
So talk to me about this partnership with Samsung that you've engaged in. They've now announced a flip phone. Will a new gadget like that help accelerate this?
I feel that there's enormous potential for 5G to change the form factor of devices. We're very proud of this partnership with Samsung and how they have been a great partner, pioneering a new technology with us. We also see a number of different devices being announced, and we see a potential for form factors to change. The most important thing is, as you change your experience with 5G, you're going to want a different type of device and a different type of screen size and resolution, and the apps are going to become way more powerful, which will actually have a more powerful hardware that goes along with it.
So you think
yes.
It's not the form factor that's going to accelerate 5G, it's 5G that's going to change the form factor?
Yes.
And what kind of form factors do you see?
I think we will start to see, bigger screens are here to stay. I think you will see the opportunity for larger screens as you have flexible OLED technology. You're also going to see devices. They're more specialized for more capable gaming because 5G will allow you to have mainstream gaming on 5G devices. And also you're going to see devices that are going to converge between productivity. Now, over time, we expect to see virtual reality or augmented reality devices as well as a companion to your phone that are going to be using 5G technology, and we hope them to look like eyeglasses.
Now, other companies coming out with 5G, Xiaomi, OnePlus, they've got their own 5G plans. How worried are you about the competition?
Not worried. All the 5G launches announced at the show, with probably exception of one device, all of them are using Qualcomm technology.
So what about Huawei? Is that the one?
Look, when we look, we always been competing with Huawei, but as also a customer of Qualcomm. But the most important thing, when we think about China in general, I like to put it within that context. China mobile ecosystem see 5G as an opportunity for them to expand not only in China but globally, and we see Xiaomi, Oppo, OnePlus, Vivo, and a number of other companies actually embracing 5G and going to Europe markets, even in the case of OnePlus going to United States market. So we think our China business will continue to expand, and 5G will be a great opportunity for that.
Huawei is facing bans on its networking equipment around the world. The UK, in particular, an interesting one to watch. How closely are you following the Huawei situation?
It's not really the business that we're in. I think our infrastructure play. It's in the small cell, especially as we think about densifying 5G networks. So we're not directly related, but Huawei is a partner on the infrastructure as we do interoperability. I think it's a sign that, if anything, this whole discussion is a sign that 5G is now way beyond mobile. It's going to become a critical infrastructure because it's going to power everything around us.
That was my interview with Qualcomm President Cristiano Amon. Coming up, California takes the lead when it comes to protecting user data online. What the state has planned to let you take on big tech. That is next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. While the tech world is waiting to see what Congress will propose when it comes to protecting users' data privacy, California isn't. the state is looking to strengthen the California Consumer Privacy Act and let consumers go directly after the likes of Google, Facebook, and more when they break that law. The measure would allow consumers to sue such companies when that happens. It is a move that could signal an onslaught of class action lawsuits and one the tech industry opposes. On Monday, we caught up with Ariel Fox Johnson, Senior Counsel for Policy and Privacy for Common Sense Media, along with Bloomberg's Kartikeya Mehrotra, who covers litigation.
In 2018, the CCPA passed unanimously. They set aside 2019 to figure out some of the details of how it would be enforced. And one of the big proposals that we saw this week, Friday, was this right to private action. It would, if passed, permit consumers in California who feel that their data has been distributed without consent or in breach of their user agreements to sue for monetary damages against companies like Facebook and Google. There are a number of other proposals, like the right for consumers to find out how much their data is worth, and B, to gain access to that data and to know exactly how it's being distributed down the line. So there's a lot of proposals up in the air.
Ariel, does common sense support some of these stronger potential additions to the law?
Yes, Common Sense is very supportive of efforts to strengthen the California Consumer Privacy Act. We expect also to see efforts by industry to weaken it, which we will oppose, but we're very supportive of strengthening efforts, particularly this private right of action that Kartikeya mentioned.
So, Kartikeya, what are the tech companies lobbying for? Because they opposed the law initially. They funded the law as opposition. Right. But ultimately, everyone was on board with what was written. You know, what are they lobbying for now?
Well, against a right to private action, for starters. In a committee hearing last week, a lobbyist for the industry said that this would be a bonanza against the industry. There will be so much litigation that it will be tough to come out from underneath from. So that's a big no-no for the industry. There's some details as well, like the right to have loyalty programs with consumers that they want to ensure, to protect. That there are some concerns that they would end up being sort of discriminatory, and then some details in the weeds about exactly who is being covered, which businesses of what size, those sorts of details.
Ariel, if the law passes as written, what would change for me as a user?
If the California Consumer Privacy Act, are you the private right of action? So if this new Senate Bill 561 by Senator Jackson passes, you as a California resident would be able to take a company to court if they sell your data when you've told them not to, or if they're not transparent about what they do with your data, or if they don't let you delete it or access your own data.
So, couldn't this law, Kartikeya, be overruled by federal privacy legislation if it comes?
That's a concern, right? If Congress ultimately down the line passes some sort of legislation that would preempt what's happening in California, there could be a scenario where everything that the lobbyists are fighting for in Sacramento could be null and void.
That was Ariel Fox Johnson of Common Sense Media and Bloomberg's Kartikeya Mehrotra. Speaking of big tech, for years, U.S. tech companies have pushed to gain a global footprint. One of the only companies successful in this quest, however, is Apple. The iPhone maker is just one of a handful of companies to generate significantly more money overseas than in the United States. However, Bloomberg opinion Shira Ovide says that while companies like Google or Amazon have struggled to grow internationally, relying on the U.S. is okay for now. Shira joined us to discuss.
The internet companies like Facebook and Google parent company Alphabet, they do have a lot of users outside of the United States, but a significant share of their revenue continues to be generated inside the United States. And the issue here is that if you look at companies like Facebook and Google, they're generating most of their money from digital advertising. Microsoft is generating most of its money from selling technology to businesses, also a big market for Amazon. And in those two markets, digital advertising and business technology sales, the U.S. is by far the largest market in the world. And in e-commerce, China is number one, the U.S. is a distant number two. And as we well know, China has not been a hospitable e-commerce market or internet market for U.S. technology companies.
Now, why is Amazon so reliant on sales in the U.S., and is that a danger? Is that an Achilles heel?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So, to my surprise, Amazon has actually gotten more reliant on the U.S. in the last 5 years rather than less. And part of that is because of AWS and its success with all kinds of customers. Again, a large portion of that spending is in the U.S. But also U.S. or North America e-commerce sales are growing faster than e-commerce sales outside the U.S. for the last couple of years. And so now 69% of Amazon's total sales last year comes from the United States. So
but what about all the money that Amazon has been pouring into India and other international markets?
I think that's a lot about the future, that those are growth markets, but right now are relatively small.
So Apple, meantime, has been doing well abroad, despite, much of the concerns we've been talking about sales in China. Will Apple's future international growth be as strong?
It's hard to see that. So the issue for Apple is that the biggest smartphone growth markets are places like India and Vietnam, where Apple doesn't look like they're in a great position, right? That their prices are relatively high compared to other smartphone companies, and they haven't really shown a willingness to tailor those products for a particular country's needs. And so that puts them at a little bit of a disadvantage, at least as far as we can see so far, in places like India.
Now, when it comes to Google and Facebook, do you foresee that their reliance on the United States will ever change?
It's going to be, I don't think so, not in the short term. So again, the issue is the biggest pool of advertising is in the United States. Yes, that market is growing more slowly than some of the explosive advertising growth markets, including China. But the U.S. is still by far the largest market. And so those companies are positioned well for the future if and when you start seeing large advertising markets in the developing world getting bigger as a share of total global advertising. But again, China is kind of the big hole for them. Where
they may never have access.
They may never be able to access China, and even if they are, they may never be successful there.
Now, I do want to get your thoughts on this new Amazon board member, Indra Nooyi, adding a fifth woman to Amazon's board. Of course, you remember the shareholder pushback about the lack of diversity on Amazon's board, and they've answered some of those protests. What do you make of the choice of Indra Nooyi?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to the board diversity issue, I think she's also a really great addition to that board, given her long experience at PepsiCo. She, as a former consumer product company CEO, knows what the challenges are of being a traditional company that's trying to pivot to the e-commerce world. And so she has that perspective now as an Amazon board member.
Now, speaking more broadly, Amazon included, what do you see as the international financial picture of these U.S. tech companies, let's say in the next 5 years? How much actually changes?
It's hard to see it changing materially in the next 5 years. Amazon might be the exception, right? We could start seeing some of those outside the U.S. e-commerce markets like India really take off. But again, if you're dependent on advertising, or if you're Microsoft depending on business technology sales, the U.S. is still just this huge sponge of revenue for those companies to take advantage of. And I don't see that changing, even if, again, the majority of users for companies like Facebook and Google are not in the United States. It's still where the money is.
Bloomberg Opinion's Shira Ovide there. Still ahead, Alibaba co-founder and executive vice chair Joe Tsai joins us for an exclusive and wide-ranging interview why he is optimistic about a trade deal between the U.S. and China. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. President Trump's top trade negotiator is dialing back expectations for a sweeping trade deal with China. But Alibaba co-founder and executive vice chairman Joe Tsai is optimistic a deal will happen. We caught up with Tsai in an exclusive interview Wednesday from the Stanford GSB Sports Innovation Conference. Take a listen.
There are a lot of issues in this trade deal, but I think the important thing is that the tariff is going to stop. I think that'll help a lot of businesses on both sides of the ocean. the Chinese manufacturers will get a reprieve. That'll help them to continue to export. So it's going to be good for the businesses that are operating on Alibaba's platform.
What if that doesn't happen?
I think the dialogue between the United States and China is going to be a continuous dialogue. Trade is not the only issue. There are issues on intellectual property. There are issues on industrial policy. So I expect that that'll be a continuous conversation. Of course, the tariff itself is really a sort of an enforcement mechanism. But if you look at Alibaba's business, our business is driven by domestic consumption and also corporate digitization. So even though we have some parts of our business that are tied to exports, but most of the business within Alibaba is driven by domestic consumption, with now 300 million consumers, middle-class consumers that are buying things. They're going to demand more products. I think over time, even if there is no trade deal now, over time, the trade deficit between China and the United States will structurally correct itself as China will import more because we have an economy that is domestic consumption has become a bigger part of the economy. So the Chinese government is talking about over the next 15 years importing $30 trillion of goods and also $10 trillion of services. I think that's a very important thing as American service companies in healthcare, in banking, can move to China and set up a foothold and serve the Chinese population.
So what does it all mean for Alibaba whether or not a deal happens?
We operate for the long term, so we're hopeful that a deal will happen. Obviously, the markets have responded to that, but if you look at our core businesses, most of it is tied to domestic consumption, as I said. So even if it doesn't happen, we're going to continue to chug along and focus on our strategy. Our strategy in new retail, for example, is focused on digitizing the domestic retail sector, making retail more efficient, and that is all driven by domestic consumption.
How optimistic are you, based on what you've seen, that a deal will be reached?
I've said before, I'm always half glass full kind of guy. So we are cautiously optimistic based on the developments. Obviously, the two delegations from the countries have met several times, and President Trump has said that there's going to be a meeting between him and President Xi at a place and time to be determined, I believe. So I think these are positive developments, and the signaling is pretty good right now.
We are here at the Sports Innovation Summit at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and you are the owner or co-owner of 3 sports teams, the Brooklyn Nets, New York Liberty, San Diego Seals. What attracted you to make these investments?
First of all, I love sports. I played sports through high school, college, and I just think it's the values of what you learn on the field can carry you very far in life. So I encourage all kids, including my own kids, to play sports.
But it's also a business opportunity for
absolutely,
you.
it's a business opportunity.
How much revenue are these teams driving?
If you look at an NBA team, it's actually a very good proposition from a business standpoint. I think the NBA is not just a league, it's a very substantial media and entertainment company. It's a very well-managed company, and the structure of the NBA is set up so that there's very good balance of between the owners and the players, and also among the owners. I was attracted to the NBA because of the international growth opportunities. When you look at markets like China with 300 million fans, the potential increase in the media rights in those markets, not just China, but also India. You're looking at Mexico, Indonesia, Philippines. So those opportunities are going to be tremendous in the future.
The NBA just announced a branded league in Africa. Why not Asia? We know in China there are a lot of basketball fans.
I don't know. You're going to have to ask Adam Silver about the geographic location, but I think the Africa League is going to help the NBA to develop players in Africa. Obviously, they've decided that there is also going to be a local fan base in Africa. There's a lot of sort of developmental aspect to that league. I think it's very exciting. I think having leagues in other parts of the world is a little bit more challenging because in Europe and also in Asia, they already have local leagues that's already been formed, playing games and all that. So I think that's one of the reasons why NBA picked Africa.
There's a mixed record for sports diplomacy dating back to the 1970s and the ping pong games, ending up with President Nixon visiting Beijing. Do you think sports could help improve tensions between the U.S. and China?
I think absolutely, because when you see athletes competing on the field and then when they get off the field or the court, they become friends, these are real authentic stories between people. And I think that people-to-people exchange, this real sort of true friendship that's genuine, authentic, is going to help the two countries understand each other better.
That was Alibaba co-founder and executive vice chair Joe Tsai. Coming up, Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak speaks out in an exclusive interview with Bloomberg what he thinks about Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg next. This is Bloomberg. Home exercise startup Peloton has chosen Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase to lead its IPO. Bloomberg has learned the offering could value the company at more than $8 billion. Peloton sells exercise bikes and treadmills with tablets attached that can stream live fitness classes. Well, Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak says he lost a lot of respect for Facebook's CEO after he saw how Mark Zuckerberg testified before U.S. Congress. Bloomberg's Youssef Gamal Eldin sat down with Wozniak in an exclusive interview and also talked about the future of tech regulation, startups, cryptocurrency, and Apple's next big thing. Take a listen.
I look for different technologies, and those are ongoing life things. Very often when I'm associated with a company, I urge them to hold off as long as you can from an IPO, because then you're no longer running your own company. The shareholders are, and your decisions are a lot different. So I'm not really looking at any specific technologies or companies, and I wouldn't think about them in terms of how do we get to an IPO anyway. It's just not how I think. I only think of how do we make a product and what will it do that's good for society.
Well, let's pick up on the tech angle. You've said in the past that you believe that Bitcoin is going to be the world's single currency, or you hope that it is going to be the world's single currency. We've seen massive value destruction in Bitcoin. Are you still a believer in that? Is that still a workable model for you?
I'm not sure I can buy that we've seen massive value destruction. I think we've seen massive value creation. There was, I think, a period of time, psychology will often drive like stock market dips in that. Oh my gosh, got to get out now, got to get out now. Yeah, the psychology factor is kind of a fear thing. And there was this idea that, my gosh, Bitcoin might go up to $40,000 and it went up to $20,000. I had a lot of Bitcoin. I had some Bitcoin, but I did never as an investor. I only had Bitcoin to experiment with and find out how to buy and sell things around the world, how to travel, how to find restaurants that would accept Bitcoin, that sort of thing. And so when it went up high, I said, whoa, wait a minute. I do not want to be one of these people. I don't invest in any stocks. I've never used Apple's stock app. I don't want to be one of these people watching the price of Bitcoin, so I sold out. And I don't know where it is now, but wherever it is, it's way over what I bought. And I still experiment with it on new Bitcoin devices and all.
We've seen tech leadership across the board get into quite a bit of trouble online. And I'm thinking here of Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg. I'm thinking here of Jack Dorsey on Twitter. When you see these issues, and you've spoken about this quite clearly in the past, what is the message that you want to send when you see these scandals?
First of all, I think Jack Dorsey's doing a lot more than Mark Zuckerberg to correct it. I lost a lot of respect for Mark Zuckerberg watching him speak and answer questions and supposedly taking some steps that are nothing, not one nickel or one penny of Facebook's income, and I don't trust that. Now there's a company in the social web called Foursquare out of New York. And Foursquare, you rate different restaurants and places you go and companies, and they keep a lot of data. They have been offered millions of dollars for their data on the users, and they've turned it down because it was unethical. So you can make a choice and still have it. You can draw the line at a good place and not a bad place. I quit my Facebook account, and I've really never used Twitter.
Is it time for the government to get more involved? I mean, there are a few legislative efforts, but clearly that needs to be taken up more seriously.
Probably. Regulation is good. Regulation is a thing that says companies will not do certain bad things, or governments will not do bad things. We have a constitution, and the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, everyone has written, the government shall not pass a law. Congress shall not pass a law. It says the government will not do certain bad things. And that kind of regulation we need some of when things are getting bad. And the United States is way behind Europe on recognizing a lot of these issues of data privacy and all.
We've got the Mobile World Congress underway, 5G and many other technologies in focus. What are you most excited about?
I used to track a lot of stuff that was going on in the mobile world and cell phones. Every day I wanted to look what's newest coming out in cell phones, keep up with it, and I'd buy the latest products. Many of them I had. And now I've lost that interest. I don't know why. I'm more interested in things like the new television sets that are coming out, the 4G, 5G television, 8G televisions, 8K televisions. I don't know that I'm going to benefit from 5G, or that I really feel the need for an increase in bandwidth, on cellular bandwidth right now. So that's not going to impact me much. Things I'm interested in electric cars, where they're going, what their benefits are, what their problems are, and the infrastructure for them. Right now, so I'm sort of at a low point. But I'm waiting for Apple to come back in the game too.
Okay.
Yeah, with something really new and outstriking.
Is that what needs to be done from Apple's side, given what we've seen from Samsung? There's a sense that Apple's falling behind in the innovation game.
Well, Apple has been the leader for quite a long time in a few areas, such as Touch ID, Facial ID, and easy payment with a phone. They were the leader, and everyone else had to follow. But they're not the leader in things like the folding phone, and that worries me, because I really do want a folding phone. It's one of those new technologies that does catch my attention. Yeah. So Apple, but Apple always has surprises. Working on a lot of things in the background. They just got so successful with the iPhone that was their whole business for a long time. Now they're branching out into a lot of their services are very good. And I'm looking for Apple TV to expand and come on. Right now, I kind of prefer my Roku.
Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak talking exclusively.
Okay, so the reason why I'm so excited about this is because, well, I use my MacBook a lot. In fact, it is the device I use the most out of every other device that I have, and I have quite a few of them. So I have a 2018 15-inch i9 MacBook Pro. This is the 560X model, not a Vega 20, because Apple didn't want to replace mine with a Vega 20. Some others got lucky, but I didn't. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm stuck with this one. And even though I still have lots of issues with it to the processor, lots of crashes when I connect this thing to Thunderbolt, which is basically every single day, overall, I do still love it. I use this thing for at least 12 hours a day. So yeah, every small improvement that the next model would get, even if it's just a slight, clock speed bump or an improved cooling system, it would have a big impact on my workflow. Reason why I'm really looking forward to the next model, especially since it does appear to be a noticeable change. So Ming-Chi Kuo, who's been the analyst with the best track record when it comes to Apple leaks, released a new report claiming that Apple is working on a new 16-inch to 16.5-inch MacBook Pro with a brand new design. Okay, so this is surprising. It's surprising because one, Apple has updated the design of the MacBook Pros in 2016, and usually Apple keeps a new design, a new generation for about 4 years, and they just updated the specs. So the previous Retina MacBook Pros, they were released in 2012, and the generation before that was launched in 2008 with the 15-inch MacBook Pro. So having a new major redesign in 2019 would make this generation of MacBook Pros the shortest lived cycle. And to be honest, that does make a lot of sense. And here's why. So initially when Apple designed the 2016 MacBook Pros, they designed them with Intel switching to a 10nm process in mind. But Intel has failed to do that. This is why Apple made them so thin and why they haven't really focused on the cooling system that much. And recently, Intel has started focusing on adding more and more cores to their processors, which is a really good thing to be honest. But the more cores you add and the more you increase the clock speed without engineering a new and smaller architecture, the more power the CPU would consume and therefore the harder it would get. Now, also when the 2016 MacBook Pros were launched, they actually had a lot of issues. I've had 10 plus issues with mine. The speakers blew out twice, the GPU failed, the keyboard failed twice. Yeah, I've had a lot of issues. But you know, aside from the new design and the touch bar that most people didn't use to its fullest anyways, the performance was also worse on the 2016 MacBook Pro than the 2015 models. And yeah, videos actually took longer to export than on the 2015 model. The 2017 model was a pretty good improvement in terms of the CPU performance, but Pro users wanted more and more. They wanted even more powerful processors, a better GPU, more RAM, more storage, and Apple finally decided to make that happen in 2018. The 2018 MacBook Pro finally featured 32GB of RAM, but Apple had to make a compromise using DDR4 memory, which actually consumes more power as LPDDR4 wasn't available yet. Apple also added a significantly more powerful Vega 20 GPU, which features pretty much double the performance that you get in the Radeon 560X. You could also get up to 4 TB of storage, so you know, this seemed like the perfect MacBook, right? Well, no, it wasn't. And that's because Apple decided to include the Intel i9 8950HK processor in the top-of-the-line model, which as a decision in itself, it was great because this is the most powerful laptop processor that you can get. It comes with 6 cores and a clock speed of 4.8 GHz, but the problem is that this chip was not designed for such a small and thin body. I mean, you're all probably very familiar with the thermal throttling issues that this MacBook Pro had. I've done a full throttling test and performance review here a few months ago, and the reality is that, you know, this processor barely goes over 3 GHz. It never reaches the advertised 4.8 GHz speeds. I mean, what Apple did was the equivalent of putting a jet engine inside a Volkswagen Beetle. You know, it would just run at 10% of its speed, otherwise it would completely destroy the Beetle. And this is why Apple needs a redesign ASAP. Especially if they want to focus on the prosumer market, they need a better cooling system, a larger battery, and they need to fix all those issues such as, you know, the T2 crashes, the T2 processor crashes, all the annoying crashes that, by the way, happen on all the Macs running this chip. It's really annoying. And they also need to fix that keyboard, which, yes, still isn't great. The 2018 MacBook Pros have a noticeably better keyboard in every single way than the 2017 model and the 2016 ones, but, it still has almost no key travel. And yes, it still breaks. Okay, so how would Apple fix all of these issues? Well, realistically, there are 2 design options here that I have in mind, essentially. So if both of them have a 16 to 16.5 inch display, then in terms of the option 1, it would have the exact same design as the current generation, just with a larger 16.5 inch display instead of 15 inches, so the whole thing would be larger. The body would be thicker, as well as have an entirely new cooling system, possibly even a vapor chamber, similar to what Microsoft has done with the Xbox One X. Now, that's pretty cool, but option number 2 is the more exciting one because this one involves an entirely new design. So we've made a full concept of this, and this is how we've envisioned it. Okay, so you know how with the new iPad Pros, Apple has actually increased the display size on the 10.5 inch model to 11 inches while keeping the exact same body. Well, they've actually done the same thing with the iPhone XS Max, which has the exact same size as the iPhone 8 Plus, just with a significantly larger display, 6.5 inch versus 5.5 inch, and the almost complete removal of the bezels. Now, since the MacBook Pros are also portable devices, I do expect Apple to do the same rather than, launch an even bigger device. Keep in mind that Apple has discontinued the 17 inches MacBook Pro. They used to sell this thing, and it's because it was too big, and most people were using this thing as desktop anyways. And if Apple does apply the same logic to the 2019 MacBook Pro, it would come the exact same form factor as the 2016 generation, just with a larger 16 to 16.5 inch display. So this would mean that the bezels would be reduced dramatically, especially the top one that's quite huge. So expect something similar to what we have on the iPad Pro. This is how we've done our concept, a uniform bezel all around the display. And with every major redesign also comes a thinner body. So the 2016 models were already incredibly thin at 1.55 centimeters, and we've actually made ours at 1.24 centimeters, so 20% thinner, which is similar to the reduction in thickness that we've had from the 2012 generation to the 2016 one. And one of my main complaints with the 2016 models, aside from the keyboard and all the other issues, has always been the touch bar. Not just the way that developers have implemented it, because come on, we don't need a bold or italics command on the touch bar. We can do that much easier and quicker using the keyboard commands. Photoshop actually implements it quite well, to be honest, but aside from the implementation, my main issue here is in terms of its size. There's so much empty and unused space left right above the touch bar, especially on the 15-inch model, and I've always felt like the touch bar was just too small, so we've actually made ours extend up until the very top. And with this much larger touch bar, Apple could also add support for the Apple Pencil, which would be awesome. So this would be perfect for not just, drawing, but also for sketching some quick notes, or for signing digital documents right there with the Apple Pencil. That would be the dream. This way it would bring the MacBook Pro closer in functionality to the iPad Pro. Now you're probably wondering why we didn't put a fingerprint reader on the touch bar anymore. And that's because Apple will most likely remove it in favor of Face ID. We now have Face ID on the new iPhones as well as the new iPad Pro, so the only product category that's still using Touch ID is the Mac. The Mac Pro and the MacBook Air to be exact. And then just like the touch bar, the speakers could also be extended to reach the very top of the body. And I don't know, I just feel like this overall as a design is a much better design than the 2016 MacBook Pro. It's similar to those, but it's a much more polished version. And something that I also expect Apple to do is to make the MacBook Pro as dark as the iMac Pro and the new Mac Mini, if not even darker than that. So I actually love the color that Microsoft has decided to go for on the Surface Laptop 2 and the Surface Pro 6. It's still matte black, and I don't know, it just looks so sleek and so much nicer than the light gray that the MacBook Pros come in. Okay, so that was the design, but what about the actual specs? Well, like Ming Chi Kuo said in his report, the display would be between 16 to 16.5 inches. Everyone probably wants an OLED display. That would be amazing. Unfortunately, it's not happening anytime soon. The iPad needs to come with OLED first. Once we get OLED on the iPad, then we'll get it on the Mac. Now, when it comes to the processor, we would get Intel's Sunny Cove architecture finally built on a 10nm process. Finally, Intel. By the way, Apple has already moved to 7. And in terms of the processor, the highest end model would be the i9 9980HK processor. This would be a replacement for the 8950HK, and this chip is said to be an 8-core processor. 8-core, 16 threads, up to 5 gigahertz, which is insane. So yeah, also Apple would require a lot of cooling for this. Now in terms of the GPU, we would be getting Intel's Gen 11 graphics for the integrated ones, which are actually a pretty big deal because these are the first graphics from Intel capable of reaching 1 teraflop of GPU performance. Now the Vega 8, for example, this is the integrated GPU inside the AMD Ryzen 5 2500. This one actually hits 1.1 teraflops. So yeah, it's gonna be close in performance to that. But obviously the 15-inch MacBook Pro would also be getting a dedicated GPU, most likely the Vega 20 again, because we haven't seen anything new announced by AMD for this year. So it's probably gonna be the same chip as in the 2018 models, just a slightly overclocked version. So yeah, that's the GPU. But something big that Apple's working on is a MacBook that uses their own Apple A-series processors. As even the 2018 iPad Pro, that thing with the Apple A12X is actually more powerful than the 2017 15-inch MacBook Pro. Yes, I'm talking about the highest end configuration that you can buy, the Intel 7920HQ processor, and that's insane. Also keep in mind that the iPad Pro